It felt too good, was that the moment the giant cowboy lost control and pounded harder. The barn door slammed shut behind them, and suddenly Jake's hand was pressed flat against my chest, pinning me against the wooden wall. His breath came fast and uneven, his face so close I could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes catching the dim light filtering through the slats. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. "Tell me this is crazy, that we're just friends, that I'm reading this all wrong." But I couldn't speak. My heart hammered so hard against his palm that I knew he could feel it. 3 years of friendship, 3 years of pretending, 3 years of late nights and stolen glances, and now this. Now everything was about to change. My name is Ethan Cross, and I never meant to fall in love with my best friend. Especially not a best friend who stood 6'4", wore dusty Wranglers like they were tailored just for him, and could lift hay bales like they weighed nothing. Jake Sullivan was the kind of guy who turned heads everywhere he went, the classic cowboy type with sun-bleached hair, rough hands, and a smile that could charm anyone within a 50-mile radius of his family's ranch in Montana. We'd met during freshman orientation at the University of Montana 3 years ago, 2 18-year-old kids from opposite worlds who somehow clicked instantly. He was the cowboy. I was the city kid from Seattle who'd never touched a horse before, and somehow, against all odds, we became inseparable. But that moment in the barn, that wasn't how our story started. To understand how we got there, you need to go back 6 months earlier, to the beginning of our senior year, when everything was still simple. When I could still pretend that the way my stomach flipped every time Jake smiled at me was just friendship. When I could still lie to myself about what I was feeling. It was late August when Jake invited me to spend the fall semester living at his family's ranch instead of in our cramped apartment near campus. His parents had built a small guest house on their property years ago, and with his older brother having moved to Colorado, the space was sitting empty. "Think about it," Jake had said, sprawled across my bed while I packed up my summer things. "No rent, fresh air, home-cooked meals from my mom, and you can finally learn to ride a horse properly instead of looking like a scared tourist every time we go out." He grinned at me, that easy, confident smile that made something twist in my chest. Plus, I could use the company. Gets lonely out there sometimes. How could I say no? I told myself it was practical, saving money, having more space, getting away from the noise of college housing. I told myself it had nothing to do with the fact that I'd get to see Jake every single day, that I'd wake up knowing he was just across the yard, that maybe, just maybe, this would finally give me the courage to figure out what these feelings actually meant. I'd known I was gay since high school, but I'd never told Jake. Never told anyone at college, really. It felt safer to keep that part of myself quiet, especially around someone like Jake, someone from a traditional ranching family, someone whose entire world was built on cowboys and cattle, and the kind of masculinity that didn't usually leave room for guys like me. But Jake had always been different, softer somehow, despite his size and strength, more thoughtful, the kind of guy who remembered your favorite coffee order and noticed when you were having a bad day, the kind of guy who made you feel seen in a way that went beyond friendship, even if neither of us had the words for it yet. The first few weeks at the ranch were perfect. I settled into the guest house, a cozy one-bedroom cabin with a wood-burning stove and windows that looked out over endless fields of golden grass. Every morning I'd wake to the sound of horses whinnying and the distant rumble of Jake's truck starting up. He'd usually come knock on my door around 7, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands, ready to rope me into whatever ranch work needed doing before our afternoon classes. I learned to mend fences, to check water troughs, to read the subtle signs that meant a storm was coming over the mountains. And slowly, without meaning to, I learned every detail of Jake Sullivan. I learned that he always wore the same battered brown Stetson his grandfather had given him, even though it was falling apart at the brim. I learned that he hummed old country songs under his breath when he worked, always slightly off-key. I learned that his hands were scarred and calloused from years of ranch work, but they were gentle when they needed to be, gentle when he showed me how to hold the reins properly, gentle when he steadied me as I climbed onto a horse for the 10th time. I learned that he took his coffee black but secretly loved the fancy vanilla creamer I bought, though he'd never admit it. And I learned that sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he'd watch me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something soft and uncertain and almost vulnerable. September melted into October, and the Montana air turned crisp and cool. The leaves on the cottonwood trees along the creek turned brilliant gold, and the work on the ranch shifted into preparing for winter. Jake and I fell into an easy rhythm, our friendship deepening in ways that felt both natural and terrifying. We'd always been close, but living together, even in separate houses, created an intimacy I hadn't anticipated. We ate most of our meals together, either at the main house with his parents or in my cabin where we'd cook simple dinners and talk until midnight. We studied side by side, our laptops open on my small kitchen table, our shoulders occasionally brushing. We watched old westerns on his laptop, Jake providing running commentary about which parts were authentic, and which were Hollywood nonsense. And slowly, achingly slowly, I felt the space between friendship and something more beginning to blur. It started with small things, moments that lasted just a beat too long. Jake's hand lingering on my shoulder when he passed behind me, our eyes meeting across the dinner table and holding just a second past comfortable. The way he'd lean against the doorframe of my cabin, arms crossed, watching me with that unreadable expression while I talked about my classes or my family or anything at all. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at my mouth when I spoke, and my words would falter, my train of thought completely derailed by the intensity in his gaze. But neither of us said anything. We existed in this strange, suspended state, too close to be just friends, but not brave enough to acknowledge what was happening between us. I convinced myself I was imagining it, that my own feelings were making me see things that weren't there. Jake was straight, I told myself. He'd had girlfriends in college. He was a rancher's son from rural Montana. This kind of thing didn't happen to guys like him. I was setting myself up for heartbreak, and I knew it, but I couldn't seem to stop. The first real crack in our careful pretense came on a Friday night in mid-October. We'd been hauling hay all day, stacking bales in the barn loft to prepare for winter feeding. It was brutal, physical work that left both of us covered in dust and sweat, our shirts clinging to our backs. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost unreal. Jake climbed down from the loft first, then reached up to help me down. I took his hand, and for a moment we just stood there, my hand in his, both of us breathing hard from the work. "You did good today," Jake said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made my chest tighten. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, so subtle I might have imagined it. "When you first got here, you could barely lift a bale. Now look at you." His eyes met mine, warm and proud, and something else I couldn't name. We were standing close, close enough that I could smell the hay dust and sweat and that indefinable scent that was just Jake. Close enough that I could see the way his pupils had dilated, the way his breath caught just slightly. I should have stepped back, should have laughed it off, made some joke about finally building some muscle. Instead, I heard myself say, "Good teacher," my voice barely above a whisper. The air between us felt thick, charged with something electric. Jake's hand was still holding mine, and I could feel his pulse beating fast against my wrist. His gaze dropped to my mouth just for a second, and my heart stopped completely. Then his mom's voice called from the house, asking if we wanted dinner, and the moment shattered. Jake dropped my hand like it had burned him, took a step back, cleared his throat. "Yeah, we should go eat," he stammered, not quite meeting my eyes. He practically bolted from the barn, leaving me standing there alone, my hands still tingling from his touch, my mind racing with what had almost just happened. Dinner that night was awkward. Jake barely looked at me, directing all his conversation to his parents while I pushed food around my plate and tried not to think about the way he'd looked at my mouth. When we finally escaped back to my cabin under the pretense of studying, the tension followed us like a third presence in the room. We sat at the table with our textbooks open, but neither of us could focus. I could feel Jake watching me from across the table, could sense the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on both of us. "Ethan," he finally said, his voice rough. I looked up to find him staring at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over it. "Okay," I managed. He opened his mouth, closed it, ran his hand through his hair in that frustrated gesture I'd seen him do 100 times. "Are you," he started, then stopped. The vulnerability in his expression was almost painful to witness. "Do you ever feel like another stop?" He pushed back from the table abruptly, started packing my small kitchen. "I'm screwing this up. I don't even know what I'm trying to say." "Jake," I stood up, moved closer to him. "Whatever it is, you can tell me." He stopped packing, turned to face me. We were standing in the middle of my tiny kitchen, the space between us charged with 3 years of unspoken feelings. "Do you ever feel like there's something between us?" he asked, the words rushing out like he had to say them before he lost his nerve. "Something more than friendship, or am I completely losing my mind here?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at him, this beautiful, impossible man, and for once I couldn't hide behind pretense or denial. "You're not losing your mind," I said quietly. "I feel it too. I've felt it for a long time." The relief that washed over Jake's face was palpable. He took a step toward me, then seemed to think better of it. I've never done this before," he admitted, his voice shaking slightly. "I've never felt this way about a guy. Hell, I've never felt this way about anyone, and it's terrifying. I don't know what I'm doing, Ethan. All I know is that you're all I think about. When I wake up, I'm wondering if you're awake yet. When I'm working, I'm looking forward to seeing you at lunch. At night, I lie in bed and think about knocking on your door just to, I don't even know, just to be near you." My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. "Jake, I'm not finished," he interrupted, taking another step closer. We were inches apart now. I know this is complicated. I know my family, this community, it's not exactly progressive out here. And I know you probably think I'm just some confused rancher who doesn't know what he wants, but I do know. I know that I've never connected with anyone the way I connect with you. I know that when you smile at me, it feels like the sun coming out. I know that the idea of you leaving, of going back to Seattle after graduation, makes me feel like I can't breathe. His hand came up, hesitating just inches from my face. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling. I couldn't speak. Instead, I closed the distance between us, my hand reaching up to cup his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble beneath my palm, warm and real. I've been in love with you for 2 years, I whispered. I just never thought, I never imagined you could feel the same way. The sound Jake made was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. His forehead dropped against mine, his hands coming up to grip my shoulders like he needed to anchor himself. I'm so scared, he admitted. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what happens next. All I know is that I can't keep pretending there's nothing between us. Then don't, I said simply. We'll figure it out together. For a long moment, we just stood there, breathing the same air, our hearts pounding in sync. Then Jake's hand slid into my hair, gentle but sure, and he tilted my head back just enough to look into my eyes. Can I? He started, his voice rough with emotion. Is it okay if I answered by closing the final inch between us. The first touch of Jake's lips against mine was soft, tentative, like he was afraid I might disappear if he pushed too hard. But when I sighed against his mouth, when my hands fisted in his shirt and pulled him closer, something in him seemed to unleash. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more real. His hands were in my hair, on my face, sliding down my back like he couldn't decide where he wanted to touch me first. We stumbled backward until my back hit the wall, and Jake pressed against me, all hard muscle and barely contained intensity. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against mine again. Wow, he breathed. That was. Yeah, I agreed, unable to form more coherent words. He pulled back enough to look at me, his eyes searching my face. What do we do now? He asked. Where do we even start? Maybe we start by being honest, I suggested. No more pretending, no more hiding what we feel. Jake nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. A real smile, open and hopeful in a way I'd never seen from him before. Okay, honesty, I can do that. He pressed a soft kiss to my forehead. I should probably go. If I stay, he broke off, his cheeks flushing in a way that made my stomach flip. Let's take this slow, okay? I want to do this right. I nodded, even though every part of me wanted him to stay. Slow is good. He kissed me once more, soft and sweet and full of promise, then forced himself to step back. At the door he turned back, his expression so tender it made my chest ache. Ethan, thank you for being patient with me, for being brave enough to tell me the truth. Always, I promised. After he left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, my fingers pressed to my lips, my heart still racing. Everything had changed in the space of an hour. The careful distance we'd maintained had collapsed, and now we were standing at the edge of something terrifying and wonderful and completely unknown. The next few weeks were like living in a dream. Jake and I navigated our new reality with a mixture of excitement and caution, learning each other in ways we'd never allowed ourselves before. We kept our relationship quiet, not out of shame, but because we both needed time to figure out what this meant without the pressure of outside expectations. On the ranch, around Jake's parents, we were still just best friends. But in private, in the stolen moments between work and classes, we were something else entirely. We'd kiss in the barn after finishing our chores, pressed up against the hay bales with dust motes dancing in the late afternoon light. We'd hold hands while watching movies in my cabin, Jake's thumb tracing circles on my palm while some old western played on the screen. We'd talk for hours about everything and nothing, our fears, our dreams, our childhoods, the future we might build together. Jake was thoughtful and tender in ways that constantly surprised me, always checking in, always making sure I was comfortable with how fast we were moving. And we were moving slowly. Jake meant it when he said he wanted to do things right. We kissed, a lot, but he always pulled back before things got too heated, always made sure we were both ready before taking any next step. It was sweet and frustrating in equal measure, but I respected his need to take his time. This was all new for him, and I could see the internal struggle he was navigating, reconciling his feelings for me with everything he'd been taught about relationships and masculinity and what was normal in his world. November brought the first serious snow, blanketing the ranch in white and changing the nature of our daily work. We spent long days checking on cattle, breaking ice in water troughs, and making sure the animals were prepared for winter. The physical work was grueling, but I loved it, loved the way my body was growing stronger, loved the satisfaction of finishing a hard day's labor, and most of all, loved working alongside Jake, our partnership now enriched with this new dimension of intimacy. It was during one of these long, snowy days that things began to shift. We'd been out checking fences in the north pasture, and the weather had turned quickly, a blizzard rolling in faster than we'd anticipated. By the time we made it back to the barn, we were both freezing, our clothes soaked through from the snow, our hands numb despite our gloves. Jake's lips were actually turning blue, and I wasn't much better off. "We need to warm up now," Jake said through chattering teeth. The main house was a quarter-mile away, and the guest house wasn't much closer. But the barn was right here, and Jake had always kept it stocked with emergency supplies. He pulled me toward the tack room, where a small space heater sat in the corner and blankets were stored for sick animals. He flipped on the heater, then started peeling off his wet jacket with shaking hands. "Get those wet clothes off before you freeze to death," he ordered, his fingers fumbling with his shirt buttons. I did the same, trying not to think about the fact that we were both about to be half-naked in a small room together. This was about survival, about not getting hypothermia. That was all. Except when I glanced over at Jake, I found him staring at me with an expression that had nothing to do with cold and everything to do with want. We were both standing there in just our jeans, our bare skin erupting in goosebumps from the cold, and the air between us shifted into something electric. Jake grabbed one of the horse blankets and wrapped it around both of us, pulling me against his chest so we could share body heat. It was practical, necessary even. But the feel of his skin against mine, the way his arms wrapped around me, the way our hearts beat against each other, there was nothing practical about my reaction to it. I tilted my head back to look at him and found him already looking down at me, his eyes dark and intense in the dim light of the tack room. "Ethan," he breathed, and then his mouth was on mine, hungry and desperate in a way it had never been before. This wasn't the sweet, tentative kissing we'd been doing. This was raw need, 3 years of wanting finally breaking through his careful control. His hands slid up my back, pressing me closer, and I gasped against his mouth. The blanket fell forgotten to the floor as we stumbled backward until Jake's back hit the wall and I pressed against him, my hands exploring the planes of his chest, the ridges of muscle I'd only been able to admire from a distance before. "Is this okay?" Jake asked raggedly, even as his hands tangled in my hair. "Tell me if this is too much, if you want to stop." "Don't stop," I managed. "Please don't stop." What followed was a blur of sensation and emotion, hands and mouths and whispered confessions, the space heater slowly warming the small room while we warmed each other. We didn't go too far, even in the heat of the moment. Jake maintained enough presence of mind to pump the brakes before things crossed into territory we weren't ready for. But what we did share was intimate and real and more meaningful than anything I'd ever experienced before. Afterward, we sat wrapped in the blanket together, our backs against the wall, my head on Jake's shoulder while he absently ran his fingers through my hair. "That was," he started, then laughed softly. "I don't even have words for what that was." "Yeah," I agreed, pressing a kiss to his collarbone. "Me neither." He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers continuing their gentle movement through my hair. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I think I have been for a while now. I just didn't know what to call it until recently." My heart clenched. "I love you too," I whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes." He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "We should probably talk about what happens next. After graduation, I mean. I know you've got job prospects in Seattle, and I've got the ranch here. I don't want to assume anything, but I also need you to know I want a future with you, Ethan, whatever that looks like." The future, it was something we'd been carefully avoiding, both of us aware that graduation was looming and decisions would need to be made. "I don't have all the answers yet," I admitted, "but I know I don't want to lose this. Lose you. We'll figure something out." "Together?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "Together," I promised. We stayed in the tack room until the storm passed and our clothes dried out enough to wear, then made our way back to civilization separately, him to the main house, me to my cabin. But something had shifted between us, some invisible line crossed. The slow burn we'd been carefully maintaining had flared into something hotter, more urgent. And while part of me knew we should probably slow down again, another part, a larger part, didn't want to waste a single moment of the time we had left. The next few weeks were a delicate balance of trying to maintain normalcy while navigating the intensity of what we were feeling. We were still careful around Jake's parents, still maintained our separate living spaces, but the nights became ours. Jake would wait until his parents went to bed, then slip across the yard to my cabin, where we'd spend hours tangled together, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal fascination. It was during one of these nights that Jake finally opened up about his deeper fears. We were lying in my bed, the wood stove crackling across the room, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my bare shoulder. "I'm terrified of telling my parents," he admitted quietly. "Not because I think they'll disown me or anything. They're good people. But this ranch, it's been in our family for 4 generations. My dad always assumed I'd take it over, raise my own kids here someday, continue the legacy. How do I tell him that the future he imagined for me isn't the one I want? I turned to face him, my hand coming up to cup his jaw. What future do you want? I asked gently. His eyes met mine, open and honest. One with you in it, that's all I know for sure. Everything else, the ranch, where we live, what we do, I can be flexible on all of it. But you're not negotiable anymore, Ethan. You're the first thing I've ever wanted more than this ranch. The weight of that confession settled over me like a blanket. You don't have to choose, I said. We'll find a way to make it work. Maybe I take a job in Montana instead of Seattle. Maybe we. You'd do that, Jake interrupted, propping himself up on his elbow to look down at me. You'd stay here, give up the opportunities you have back home. For you, in a heartbeat, I said, meaning every word. Seattle's just a city, Jake, you're home. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of every emotion we'd been dancing around for months. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You're wrong, I said firmly. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I'm going to spend as long as you'll let me proving that to you. We fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the future still uncertain but feeling more possible than it had before. But reality has a way of crashing in when you least expect it. And for us, that crash came just a week before Thanksgiving, in the form of Jake's ex-girlfriend showing up at the ranch unannounced. Her name was Miranda, and she dated Jake for most of sophomore year before they'd broken up amicably, according to Jake. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women are, long dark hair, bright smile, the kind of confidence that came from always knowing she belonged wherever she was. She showed up on a Saturday afternoon while Jake and I were working on repairing one of the barn doors, and the look on Jake's face when he saw her was pure panic. Miranda, he said, his voice higher than normal. What are you? I didn't know you were coming. She laughed, coming over to give him a hug that he returned stiffly. Surprise, I'm back in town for Thanksgiving and thought I'd stop by. I've missed you, Jake. Her eyes slid to me, curious and assessing. You must be the famous Ethan I've heard so much about. Jake's parents mentioned he had his best friend living here now. That's me, I said, forcing a smile and shaking her offered hand. Nice to meet you. What followed was one of the most excruciating afternoons of my life. Jake's mom invited Miranda to stay for dinner, and suddenly I was watching the woman my boyfriend used to love charm his entire family with practiced ease. She and Jake's mom talked about old times, about the church fundraisers Miranda used to help with, about her new job in Billings. Jake's dad asked about her father's cattle operation. And through it all, Jake sat there looking increasingly uncomfortable, while I pushed food around my plate and tried not to think about how perfectly Miranda fit into his world in ways I never could. After dinner, Jake's mom suggested we all go for a walk to help digest the meal, and somehow I ended up trailing behind while Miranda walked next to Jake, her hand occasionally touching his arm as she talked. I knew I was being ridiculous. Jake had made his choice, had told me over and over that I was what he wanted. But watching them together, seeing how easy it would be for him to just slip back into that life. That future his parents expected, it awakened every insecurity I'd been trying to suppress. When Miranda finally left, promising to stop by again before heading back to Billings, Jake immediately sought me out. I was in my cabin, trying to grade papers for one of my classes and failing miserably. He knocked once and came in without waiting for an answer, his expression anxious. That was unexpected, he said, closing the door behind him. I'm sorry, I had no idea she was going to show up. It's fine, I said, not looking up from my laptop. She seems nice. Ethan, he crossed the room and gently closed my laptop, forcing me to look at him. What's wrong? Talk to me. I wanted to brush it off, to pretend everything was fine, but Jake had asked me to be honest, and honesty was what our relationship was built on. It's stupid, I started, then sighed when he gave me his no-bullshit look. Watching you with her today, it just made me realize how much easier your life would be if you chose someone like her instead of me. She fits, Jake, in your world with your family in this community. I'm just the gay guy from the city who can barely ride a horse. Jake looked at me like I'd just said the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. You think I want easy? He asked incredulously. Ethan, I spent 2 years with Miranda and you know what I felt. Nothing. Sure, she was nice. Sure, my parents loved her. Sure, it would have been the simple path, but I didn't love her, not the way I love you. He took my hands in his, pulling me up from my chair. You want to know what I felt when I saw her today? Panic, because I was terrified she'd somehow sense what's between us, that she'd say something to my parents before I had a chance to. And then I felt guilty, because Miranda doesn't deserve to be part of our drama, but mostly I just wanted her to leave so I could come find you. His hands came up to frame my face. You're not just some guy from the city who can't ride a horse. You're the person who makes me laugh, who challenges me to think differently, who sees me, really sees me, in ways no one else ever has. You're the person I choose every single day. so please stop comparing yourself to a past that I don't even want. I leaned into his touch, feeling some of the tension drain from my shoulders. I'm sorry, you're right, I'm being ridiculous. It scared me, seeing how perfect she'd be for the life everyone expects you to live. I don't care about anyone's expectations except my own, Jake said firmly. And my expectation, my hope, is that you and I figure out how to build a life together. One that works for both of us, not one that fits someone else's idea of what my future should look like. He kissed me then, soft and reassuring, and I let myself sink into it, into the certainty of his feelings. We spent the rest of the evening curled up together, talking about our fears and insecurities, about the future we were both scared to want too badly. It was one of those conversations that somehow brought us even closer, the kind of vulnerable honesty that either breaks a relationship or cements it into something unshakable. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing us yet. Thanksgiving came and went. Jake and I spent it with his family, maintaining our careful pretense while his aunt asked him repeatedly if he was dating anyone, and his grandmother not so subtly hinted that she was eager for great-grandchildren. Every question was a small knife twist, a reminder of all the expectations we were tiptoeing around. After everyone left, Jake looked so exhausted that I almost suggested we just tell his parents the truth. But he wasn't ready, and I respected that, even as I worried about what keeping this secret was doing to him. The real breaking point came in early December, during one of the worst snowstorms Montana had seen in years. The ranch was effectively cut off from the outside world for 3 days, all of us hunkered down and waiting for the storm to pass. On the second night, Jake's dad asked him to help move some equipment in the main barn, and I volunteered to help. We were halfway through the job when Jake's dad started talking about the future. Your mother and I have been thinking, he said, his breath misting in the cold air. You're graduating in May, and we want to make sure you know the ranch is yours if you want it. I know I can't pay you what you might make in the city, but this land, this life, it's your inheritance, your legacy. He paused, looking at his son with pride. And whenever you're ready to settle down, bring home a good woman, we can talk about building you a house on the north section. Give you and your future family some privacy while still keeping you close. I watched Jake's face go carefully blank, the mask he wore when he was trying to hide what he was feeling. Dad, I appreciate that, really, but I need you to know, my future might not look exactly the way you're imagining it. His dad laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. I know, you young people today, you want to travel, see the world before you settle. That's fine, take your time, the ranch isn't going anywhere. He headed toward the barn door, clearly considering the conversation over. Just don't take too long, your mother's anxious for grandkids. After he left, Jake stood frozen in the middle of the barn, his shoulders rigid with tension. I wanted to go to him to offer comfort, but I didn't know if he'd welcome it right then. Finally, he turned to look at me, and the anguish in his face nearly broke my heart. I can't keep doing this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't keep lying to them. Every conversation feels like I'm betraying them and betraying us at the same time. So tell them, I said gently. Jake, they love you, give them a chance to accept this. You don't understand, he said, frustration seeping into his voice. It's not just about acceptance, it's about everything they've planned for, everything they've worked for. This ranch, it needs the next generation to keep it going. If I tell them I'm with you, that I'm gay, that there won't be grandkids, at least not the traditional way, I'm not just changing my life, I'm changing theirs too. And what's the alternative? I asked. You spend the rest of your life pretending to be someone you're not. You marry a woman you don't love just to give your parents the future they imagined. Jake, that's not fair to anyone, not to you, not to some hypothetical woman, and honestly, not to your parents either. They deserve to know the real you. What if the real me isn't what they want? He shot back. What if they can't accept it? What if I lose them? The fear in his voice made me ache. I crossed the distance between us and took his hands. Then you'll still have me, and if they truly love you, which I believe they do, they'll come around eventually. But you can't keep carrying this weight alone. It's eating you alive. Jake pulled his hands away, running them through his hair in agitation. I need time, he said. I need to figure out how to. I can't just drop this on them without a plan, without knowing what I'm going to say. Okay, I said, even though everything in me wanted to push harder. Take the time you need, I'll be here. But over the next few weeks, as December deepened and finals approached, I watched Jake retreat into himself. He still came to my cabin at night, still held me and told me he loved me, but there was a distance growing between us that I didn't know how to bridge. The secret we were keeping felt less like a temporary thing and more like a permanent fixture, and I started to wonder if Jake would ever be ready to choose a future that included both his family and me. The breaking point came 2 weeks before Christmas. We'd just finished our last finals, and the pressure of school was finally off. I'd been hoping that with exams done, Jake would relax, that we could enjoy the holidays together without the stress of hiding and studying piled on top of everything else. Instead, Jake seemed more tense than ever. We were in the barn, always the barn, the place where we could steal moments of privacy, and I was watching him fix a broken stall door with more force than was strictly necessary. "Jake," I finally said, "we need to talk." He didn't look up from his work. "About what?" "About us, about where this is going, about whether you're ever going to be ready to stop hiding." He froze, the hammer still raised. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "Maybe not," I agreed, "but I need to know, Jake. Are we building toward a future together, or am I just your secret? The guy you love in private but can't acknowledge in public?" He finally turned to look at me, and the pain in his eyes was visceral. "You know it's not like that." "Do I?" I asked, hating how my voice shook, because from where I'm standing, it's starting to feel like I'm something you're ashamed of, like what we have is only real when no one else is watching. "That's not true," Jake insisted, crossing to me. "Ethan, you know how I feel about you. That hasn't changed." "Your feelings haven't changed," I said, "but your willingness to fight for this for us, that seems pretty questionable. It's been months, Jake, months of sneaking around, of pretending, of watching you shut down every time your family mentions your future. I can't keep being the thing you hide." "I'm not ready," he said, his voice breaking. "I need more time." "How much time?" I demanded. "Another month, 6 months, a year? When is it going to be enough, Jake? When are you going to decide that I'm worth the risk?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jake stared at me, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, and I could see him struggling with something internal. Finally, he said the words I'd been dreading. "Maybe you should go back to Seattle after Christmas. Get some distance, think about whether this is really what you want, whether I'm really what you want." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Is that what you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "For me to leave?" "I don't know what I want," Jake admitted, and the honesty in his voice somehow hurt worse than a lie would have. "All I know is that I'm drowning here. I love you, Ethan. God, I love you so much it terrifies me. But I also love my family, this ranch, this life, and I don't know how to reconcile all of it. Maybe some space would help us both figure out what we're willing to sacrifice for this." I wanted to argue, to fight, to demand that he choose right now, but looking at his face, at the exhaustion and fear and genuine confusion, I realized that pushing him would only make things worse. "Okay," I said quietly. "If that's what you need, I'll go, but Jake, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. I'm asking you to choose a life where you get to be happy, where you get to be yourself. If you can't see the difference, then maybe you're right. Maybe we do need space." I walked out of the barn before he could respond, before the tears I was fighting could fall where he could see them. I made it back to my cabin and immediately started packing, throwing clothes into my duffel bag with shaking hands. I'd give myself through Christmas. I'd already promised Jake's mom I'd be there for the holiday dinner, but after that I was done. Done waiting, done hopping, done being someone's secret. The knock on my door came an hour later. I knew it was Jake before I even opened it. He stood on my porch, his face red from the cold and from crying, his eyes pleading. "Don't pack," he said. "Please, Ethan, don't leave like this." "What else am I supposed to do?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. "You asked me to go." "I was scared," he admitted, closing the door behind him. "I panicked, but the thought of you actually leaving, of losing you, Ethan, I won't survive it." "Then what do you want from me?" I asked, exhausted. "Because I can't keep doing this dance where we take 1 step forward and 2 steps back every time things get hard." Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at my half-packed bag like it represented everything he was afraid of losing. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "I want to tell them, my parents. I want to tell them about us, about me, about everything. Tonight." I stared at him, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. "Jake." "I'm terrified," he continued. "I'm absolutely terrified, but I'm more terrified of losing you than I am of whatever happens when I tell them the truth. You were right, I can't keep living like this. I can't keep hiding the best thing that's ever happened to me because I'm afraid of disappointing people." My heart was pounding. "Are you sure? I don't want you to do this just because we fought. I want you to be ready." He crossed to me, taking my face in his hands. "I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be, and I need you there with me when I tell them. Not hiding in the cabin, not as just my friend. As my partner, the person I love. Will you do that with me?" I covered his hands with mine. "Of course, whatever you need." He kissed me then, desperate and grateful and terrified all at once. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "Okay, let's do this before I lose my nerve." The walk to the main house felt endless. With every step, I could feel Jake's fear radiating off him, could see his hands shaking. At the door he paused, taking several deep breaths. "Together?" he asked, echoing the promise we'd made to each other months ago. Together, I confirmed. His parents were in the living room, his mom knitting while his dad read the newspaper. They both looked up with warm smiles when we walked in, smiles that faltered slightly when they saw our expressions. "Jake," his mom said, setting down her knitting, "is everything all right?" Jake's hand found mine, his grip almost painfully tight. "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it before you say anything, because if I stop, I might not be able to start again." His parents exchanged concerned glances but nodded. Jake took another shaky breath, and I squeezed his hand in silent support. "I'm gay," Jake said, the words rushing out in a jumble. "I've known for a while, but I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared of disappointing you, of changing everything you'd planned for me in this ranch, but I can't keep hiding anymore. And I can't keep hiding the fact that I'm in love with Ethan. We've been together for months, and he's everything to me. He's my future if he'll have me. And I know this isn't what you expected, and I know it changes things, but I need you to know the truth. I need you to know me." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Jake's parents process what they'd just heard, saw the shock register on their faces. Jake's mom's hand had gone to her mouth, and his dad had gone very still. "How long?" his dad finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Have I known I was gay? A couple of years. Have I been with Ethan? Since October." "All this time," his mom said quietly, "you've been lying to us." "Not lying," Jake said desperately. "Not exactly. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. I was scared." "Scared of what?" his dad asked. "Scared of us. You think we'd disown you, kick you out?" "I didn't know," Jake's voice cracked. "I didn't know how you'd react. All I knew was that I wasn't the son you expected, and I didn't know if you could love the son I actually am." His mom stood abruptly, and for a terrifying moment I thought she was going to leave the room. Instead, she crossed to Jake and pulled him into a fierce hug. "Jacob Sullivan," she said, her voice thick with tears, "you are our son, our son. Nothing is ever going to change that. Do you understand me?" Jake's composure crumbled. He buried his face in his mother's shoulder and sobbed, all the fear and tension of the past months pouring out of him. His dad stood and joined the embrace, and I found myself stepping back, giving them this moment as a family. When Jake finally pulled back, his face blotchy and wet, his mom cupped his cheeks. "I won't pretend I'm not surprised," she said gently. "And I won't pretend I don't need time to adjust my thinking about your future. But Jake, honey, all we've ever wanted is for you to be happy. If Ethan makes you happy, then we'll find a way to be happy about it too." His dad nodded, though I could see he was still processing. "I'm going to need time," he admitted. "This is a lot to take in, but your mother's right, you're our son. That comes first before any expectations or plans or anything else." Jake turned to look at me, his eyes shining with tears and relief and hope. I smiled at him, my own eyes wet, and he reached out a hand to pull me closer. "Mom, Dad, I know you know Ethan as my friend, but I want you to really meet him, as the person I love." What followed was one of the most surreal conversations of my life. We all sat down in the living room, and Jake's parents asked questions, some awkward, some touching, all clearly coming from a place of trying to understand. They asked how we met when we realized we had feelings for each other, what our plans were for the future. They asked me about my family, about my own coming out experience, about my intentions toward their son. It was intense and occasionally uncomfortable, but it was real. No more hiding, no more pretense. By the time we left the main house several hours later, nothing was completely resolved, but the air felt different. Lighter somehow. Jake's parents had asked for time to process, had made it clear they'd need to have more conversations. But they'd also made it equally clear that Jake, and by extension, I would always be welcome in their home. Walking back to my cabin, Jake was quiet, his hands still clasped in mine. On the porch, he finally spoke. "I can't believe I did that. I can't believe it's over. The secret, the hiding, it's actually over." "How do you feel?" I asked. He considered the question, then pulled me into his arms. Terrified, relieved, exhausted, happy, all of it at once. He pulled back to look at me, but mostly I feel free. For the first time in my life, I feel like I can actually breathe. I understood exactly what he meant. The weight we'd been carrying, the constant vigilance, the fear of discovery, the energy required to maintain the pretense, it had been slowly suffocating both of us. Now, finally, we could just be. That night, wrapped in each other's arms, Jake whispered against my hair, "I meant what I said to my parents. You're my future, Ethan, if you'll have me." Always, I promised, the same word I'd given him months ago, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like a vow. The next few weeks weren't easy. Jake's parents were genuinely trying, but there were awkward moments and difficult conversations. His dad struggled more than his mom, caught between his love for his son and his traditional beliefs about what family should look like. There were dinners where the tension was thick enough to cut, where well-meaning questions came out wrong and hurt feelings had to be navigated. But through it all, Jake never wavered. He'd made his choice, and he stood by it with a determination that made me love him even more. Christmas came and Jake's extended family arrived for the annual Sullivan gathering. Jake and I had long discussions about how to handle it. Did we tell everyone at once, or did we let Jake's parents share the news in their own time? In the end, we decided to be ourselves and let the chips fall where they may. If people asked, we'd be honest. The revelation that Jake was gay, and dating his male best friend, rippled through his family in waves. Some relatives were immediately supportive. Jake's Aunt Sarah, surprisingly, gave him a huge hug and told him she'd always known there was something special about him. His grandmother took longer, sitting Jake down for a serious conversation about faith and family that I wasn't privy to, but whatever she said must have been okay because Jake emerged from her room with tears in his eyes and a relieved smile. Others were less accepting. A few cousins made their discomfort clear, and one uncle left early, though not before making some choice comments about lifestyle choices that made Jake's dad physically step between them. But through it all, Jake's immediate family stood firm. When that uncle made his comment, Jake's dad, who'd been struggling himself, looked him dead in the eye and said, "That's my son you're talking about, and his partner. If you can't be respectful, you're not welcome here." It was the first time Jake's dad had referred to me as Jake's partner, and the look on Jake's face was worth every uncomfortable moment we'd endured. New Year's came and went, and suddenly we were facing the spring semester, our last semester of college. Graduation was looming, and with it, all the decisions we'd been putting off. Where would we live? What would we do? How would we build a life that honored both our needs? The answer, as it turned out, came from an unexpected source. Jake's dad approached us one evening in January, asking if we could take a walk with him. He led us out to the north pasture, to the spot he'd mentioned before, the place where he'd imagined building Jake a house someday. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said, his breath misting in the cold air. "About the ranch, about the future, about what legacy really means." He turned to look at both of us. "When I imagined passing this ranch down to you, Jake, I had a very specific picture in my mind. You, a wife, grandkids running around. That was my dream for this place." Jake's hand tightened in mine, bracing for rejection. But his dad continued, "Thing is, that was my dream, not yours. And I realized, what kind of father would I be if I asked you to live my dream instead of your own?" He pulled out some folded papers from his jacket. "So I've been working with a lawyer, redrawing the succession plans for the ranch. The land will still be yours if you want it, but I'm restructuring things to give you more flexibility. You could run cattle like we do, or you could diversify, maybe some guest ranch operations or agricultural tourism. Whatever you and Ethan decide together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jake seemed equally stunned. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," his dad interrupted. "There's more. I know Ethan has opportunities in Seattle, and I know ranching isn't his background. So I've been talking to some folks, and there's a demand for sustainable farming consultants, people who can help ranches modernize and diversify. With Ethan's degree in environmental science and business, he'd be perfect for it. He could start his own consulting firm, work remotely, travel when needed. And you, Jake, could manage the ranch operations." He looked between us. "I'm not saying you have to do this. Maybe you both want to move to the city, and that's fine. But if you want to stay, if you want to build a life here together, I want you to know there's room for that. There's room for both of you." Jake was crying again, but this time there were tears of joy. "You'd really do that, restructure everything." "Son," his dad said, pulling him into a hug, "I'd do a hell of a lot more than that to see you happy, both of you." He pulled back, wiping at his own eyes. "You're not who I expected, Jake. Neither of you are, but maybe that's okay. Maybe that's better." Over the next few weeks, Ethan and I talked endlessly about what we wanted. The opportunity Jake's dad was offering was incredible, but I didn't want Jake to feel trapped by it, to feel like he had to stay on the ranch just because it was expected. And I didn't want to give up my own dreams just to fit into his life. But the more we talked, the more we realized that our dreams didn't have to be mutually exclusive. I could build a consulting business that would let me travel to cities when I wanted while still being based in Montana. Jake could modernize the ranch, bring it into the 21st century in ways his dad had never imagined. We could build a life that honored both our backgrounds, my city roots and his ranching heritage. More than that, we realized we wanted to do it together. The ranch wasn't just Jake's legacy anymore, it was becoming ours. A place where we could put down roots, build a future, maybe even start a family someday. Not the traditional family his parents had imagined, but a family nonetheless. That brings me back to where this story started, that moment in the barn when everything changed. Except now you know the full context. You know, the months of tension and fear and beautiful discovery that led to Jake pressing me against that wall, his hand on my heart, his eyes asking for permission to cross that final line. What happened after that moment? Well, that's a story for another time. Let's just say that the barn door stayed closed for a while, and when we finally emerged, disheveled and grinning like idiots, we knew without a doubt that we'd made the right choice. Every choice, to be honest, to fight for each other, to build something real instead of settling for something easy. Now, as I'm sitting here in the home Jake and I built together on that north pasture, watching the sun set over the mountains while Jake fixes dinner in our kitchen, I can honestly say I've never been happier. We've been living here for 6 months now, both of us graduated and embarking on our careers. My consulting business is slowly building clients, and Jake's implemented some innovative sustainable practices that have other ranchers in the area taking notice. It's not always easy. We still face prejudice sometimes, still get stared at in town, still have to navigate family members who haven't quite come around, but we do it together. Jake's parents have become 2 of our biggest supporters. His mom teaches me how to cook traditional family recipes, and his dad and I have long conversations about environmental conservation and land management. They've even started talking about grandkids in abstract terms, acknowledging that our path to parenthood might look different but no less valid. And the ranch, the place that once felt like it might be the wedge that drove us apart, has become our sanctuary. It's where we're building our life, our future, our legacy. It's where we get to be ourselves without apology or explanation. Every morning, I still wake up to the sound of horses and Jake's truck starting up. But now, instead of walking across a yard to see him, I just roll over and there he is, sleep-rumpled and beautiful, the morning light catching in his hair. And every night after a day of work, we sit on our porch and watch the sun set, his hand in mine, both of us amazed at how far we've come from those scared boys who didn't know how to name what they felt. The title of this story asked if there was a moment when Jake lost control and everything changed. The truth is, Jake didn't lose control, he found it. He found the courage to control his own narrative, his own future, his own happiness. We both did. And it felt too good to be anything but exactly right. So should I tell you what happened during our first night in our new house? What Jake whispered to me under the stars on our porch? How we celebrated this new chapter of our lives? If you want to hear about the romantic moments that followed, the challenges we still face, and how our love story continues to unfold, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more LGBTQ+ love stories that celebrate courage, authenticity, and the power of choosing love over fear. Your support means everything and helps me create more content that represents our community. Comment below what moment in Jake and Ethan's story resonated with you the most. Have you ever had to choose between love and expectations? Share your thoughts. I read every single comment. Read.